では続きまして、ロンドンのナショナルギャラリーの館長のガブリエレ・フィナルディさん、壇上にお願いします。
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join you this afternoon for this conference. Could I flank my gratitude to those of previous speakers, to the National Centre for Art Research. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you for your kind welcome. It's been a delight to be hosted by you. Here's a map of England, and these are the museums spread across the country. You can see that they're spread rather evenly across England. We're not looking at Wales and Scotland for the moment, but you can see that they're spread quite equally. And this map, which comes from the Mendoza Review, a review of museums in England published by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in 2017, highlights the different kinds of museums, the different categories of museums across the geography of England, from local authority museums, independent museums, university museums, of course, and national museums. We're very well endowed with museums in England, about 2,600 museums of every type, imagination and description, half of which receive some form of public funding. There are 19 national museums, mostly in London, and mostly sponsored by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Some of them are military museums, and they have a sponsor relationship with the Ministry of Defense, but 19 in total. And of course, among those 19 are museums that are familiar to many of you, the British Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum that Gus was speaking about earlier, and of course my own museum, the National Gallery. This is the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. We are located in the very center of the city. The geographical center of London is actually Trafalgar Square. It is the location for any number of major public events, demonstrations, protests, celebrations. Every now and then, England wins something at sport, and that's the occasion for grand celebrations on the square. And the background to all these public events is the facade of the National Gallery itself. So we're very present in the consciousness of British people, although it's often the case that people recognize the building but don't quite know what it is and don't quite know what's inside it. That's actually the reason why one of my predecessors, Charles Saumarez Smith, about 15 years ago, decided that the name needed to appear on the portico. So he had carved in golden letters, the National Gallery, so that you would know exactly what it is that you were seeing and exactly what it was that you were entering. You could say that the title National Gallery is still a little bit confusing because it sounds like it's a gallery of British art, which of course it isn't. It's fundamentally a collection of European painting, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. The mother of all museums in our country, of course, is the British Museum, founded in the mid-18th century, with the intention of putting before the eyes of British people global civilization, and with a specific purpose, under the influence of Enlightenment thinking, to create free, educated citizens. The national museums, the National Gallery, the British Museum, and more recently, the National Museums of Liverpool, which is a cluster of 7 museums gathered together under that title, National Museums of Liverpool, conform to essentially a similar model. They are nationally owned. They are nationally owned collections and nationally owned buildings. But I think it's useful to highlight the distinctive understanding of national. It's not exactly the same as saying state museums, although fundamentally it's the same ownership. By calling an institution national, and the National Gallery is one of the first institutions to take that title, to be called National Gallery, essentially means that they belong to the nation. And the nation is not just a geographical expression. It does refer to the people of the nation. It does refer to a gathering of individuals. It's about the people having a stake. It's about the people owning the institution. It's about the institution belonging to the people. And a great deal of our activity is about making that sense of ownership, that sense of stakeholderism in a way, very evident and truly manifested. I want to demonstrate what it means to be a national museum. I said that we are owned by, as it were, the government, but fundamentally by the people of the UK. And what this means, of course, is that the government has a responsibility towards our institutions, and that responsibility fundamentally is about funding. And I just wanted to show how the funding of three of those major nationals that I've talked about works itself out. So on the left-hand side, the National Gallery, which functions on a turnover annually of about 44 million, these are actually the figures for 21-22, you'll see that the red part of the pie chart or the circle corresponds to government funding. So about 61% of the funding for the National Gallery comes directly from government. If you look at the British Museum, which has a far larger budget, it is, after all, a much bigger collection. It's a bigger building, has many more employees, a total of 88 million, of which 51 million come from central government, so about 58% of their budget. And over on the right-hand side, the National Museums of Liverpool, that cluster, as I said before, of 7 museums, functions on £34 million in total, rather surprising, and 64% of their funding comes from central government. So you can see there's a sort of pattern that emerges there. 3 of the major nationals are funded to the tune of about 60% by central government. The funding that the government gives us, of course, is intended to cover 2 things. One is what we call resource funding. That's fundamentally salaries and programs, and a smaller proportion goes towards capital costs, which are fundamentally about taking care of our buildings. It's important to realize that in Britain, of course, many of our national institutions are old institutions, relatively old, 19th century buildings with very, very large roofs, which are, old mechanical systems and so on. Dreadful British weather, as you know. And, of course, the cost of maintaining these institutions is very substantial. And I feel responsible not only for the collections and the programs of the National Gallery, but also, of course, for the museum's structures themselves. Now, we operate under what's called the arm's length principle. So although we are national institutions, we stand at arm's length from government, which gives us a great deal of autonomy. We're autonomous in largely how we spend our money, in how we organize our staffing, how we develop our collections, and in our collaborative agreements. I wanted to show you this because, of course, there are real people who represent the nation and hold the museum, hold the gallery in trust on behalf of the nation, the same phrase that we heard used about the National Gallery of Art just a moment ago in Washington. So these are the people to whom the government entrusts the care of the museum. They, of course, then hand it over to the executive of the museum, and I lead the executive of the National Gallery. So there's our building seen from above. You might think of it as Nelson's eye view. Nelson stands on top of the column in Trafalgar Square. The building, the main building with the portico and the dome, dates from the late 1830s. Originally, the gallery was just one gallery deep, but over the years, of course, all those galleries that you see behind have been added. It's a museum fundamentally of European painting from medieval times through to the beginning of the 20th century, and it, of course, includes such major masterpieces universally admired as Leonardo's Virgin of the Rocks, and, of course, the Van Gogh Sunflowers. Our own version, of course, was on show here in Tokyo just a short while ago. The gallery figures for visiting, I think, are very interesting. We have figures right from the very beginning, from 1824, when the gallery was first founded. You'll see there's a first peak of visiting when the gallery reached 1 million visitors, right back at the time of the Great Exhibition in 1851. Gus referred to the Great Exhibition, this big exhibition in Hyde Park. There's a sort of descent in visitor numbers, and then there's a break during the Second World War when visitor numbers weren't being counted. Of course, the pictures weren't actually on display at that time. They were removed for safety to North Wales. And then you see this relentless rise of visitor numbers, a feature really of many museums throughout the world, the great success of museum institutions throughout the world and their role in modern society, hugely appreciated by the public. The growth, of course, in the phenomenon of tourism and the growth, of course, in public education. So you see this relentless rise going to the period when the Sainsbury's opens. The Sainsbury's is the building on the left-hand side that you see there, built in 1991, and then right up to figures around 6 million following the London Olympics. That's the maximum figure that the gallery has achieved. What happens afterwards, of course, is very familiar to all of us, the massive fall following the COVID pandemic. And of course, here we are 2 years later and still gradually building up the visitor numbers that we had before. It's a really interesting question to consider whether we have the ambition to reach the same sorts of visitation figures as we had before, or whether there's a new way of thinking about our visitors. During the time of between 2021 and now, of course, we had to focus much more on our local audiences. And this has really been a very, very interesting experience for us, and I think holds the seeds for some of the future challenges that we want to take up. We need, of course, to build up our new audiences. We exist in order to share our collections with the public. That's what we exist for and what we want to be specialists in. I've said already that we're very conscious that we share our collections as institutions with the public, and we want to work with the public to make that sense of ownership ever stronger, ever more marked. We want to build up new audience, and of course all of us look to design innovative programs, particularly with young people, with children and with schools, to build up the publics, the audiences of the future. There is this interesting shift between the model of a visitor attraction institution. The National Gallery pre-COVID was really just opening its doors. Vast number of tourist visitors were flowing in through our doors. We didn't really have to think terribly hard about how we were developing our audiences. Pre-COVID, about 70% of National Gallery audiences were tourist visitors who would come. They would essentially be one-time visitors. They would spend about an hour and a half in the gallery, but it was not really possible to build up a relationship with them. We, of course, are very interested in building up a relationship with our visitors. We want it to be a frequent relationship. We want it to be one that's constantly enriching. One of the reasons why we can do that is because part of our management agreement with the government of the nationals in Britain is, of course, that we're free. So our museum is open for free and frequent visiting. I grew up in London. I started visiting the National Gallery when I was a boy. I've been visiting consistently since I was a boy. And the National Gallery has become part of the fiber of my life. It's become part of the fiber of so many people's lives. We live close to, or there's the possibility for many UK citizens to have a close relationship with the institution, to really grow up with the institution, to be part of the institution. Naturally, of course, we want to grow our international audiences too, and we see here the digital revolution having made things that were unthinkable before possible to happen. It's possible to be in touch with any number of interested parties, interested individuals across the world through digital, and we work very hard to develop those relationships both within the country, but of course broadly across the nation. And we've been quick, I think, at the National Gallery to turn to new formats, to new channels in order to be able to transmit our content, but also to enter into dialogue with broad international audiences. Another important avenue that we've really taken on very seriously in the last few years in order to build up audiences, not specifically just audiences, but audiences with broader interest than just old master paintings, let's say, has been to work with contemporary artists, to work with them frequently, to invite them into the house, to invite them to reinterpret the collections, to bring with them their publics, and to enter into a constant relationship with contemporary society. Here are just a few of the artists that we've been working with in the past few years. Bridget Riley, I commissioned just a few years ago to paint what has been her largest mural, a work in which she pays homage to John Constable by using a word, messengers, the title, which is based on a phrase of Constable when he refers to the quick movement of clouds across the sky. And very recently too, with the African-American artist Kehinde Wiley, who came into the gallery and wanted to reinterpret for our own times the tradition of the sublime landscape in an exhibition that was called The Prelude. So those are some of the ways in which we want to approach new audiences. We want to grow those audiences. We want to engage with people in our country. We want to engage internationally as well. And finally, I just want to say a few words about the bicentenary that's approaching, that gives us the opportunity to strengthen those bonds with visitors, and gives us the opportunity to think of the way we will develop the relationship with new audiences. NG 200, National Gallery 200, is the umbrella title that we're using for the bicentenary celebrations that begin in the spring of 2024, just a few months away. And I'm very thrilled to say that we've decided the way we're going to kick off those bicentenary celebrations is by emphasizing that national character of the National Gallery. So on the 10th of May 2024, 12 major works from the collections, I'm sure some of those will be familiar to you, by Turner, Caravaggio, Velázquez, Canaletto, and other artists, will appear in 12 museums across the country. Half of the population of the UK will be within an hour of a major National Gallery masterpiece, and there will be all kinds of programs around those works, building up the network relationships, building up the professional relationships between National Gallery curators, conservators, educators, with those museums all the way around the country, the whole 4 nations. We also have invited in 200 creators to work with us online to produce content related to the National Gallery, which enables us, of course, to reach out way beyond the walls of the National Gallery itself, way beyond the borders of our country. These are just some of the ways in which we're going to be celebrating the bicentenary. And finally, of course, the capital works that we're undertaking at the National Gallery itself. The NG200 welcome is about a world-class welcome on the left-hand side of the building. The Sainsbury will become the main entrance to the National Gallery, that wonderful democratic entrance at ground level that brings you straight in to the building, and you're within a few meters of the great masterpieces of the collection. A transformed public realm to the northwest of Trafalgar Square, a research center for scholars, a supporters house for those who want to be in a special relationship with the National Gallery, and a learning center for children and families. There's the new look of the gallery when you come and visit us in the spring of 2025 as the culmination of the bicentenary year. And there's an image of the interior of the Sainsbury wing, those big letters appearing on the outside of the Sainsbury wing as well, so you don't think you're going to the Portrait Gallery to see the Vogue show. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.